So hello everybody and welcome to the webinar Enhance Productivity in Your Daily Reading, hosted by Sectra. And thank you all for giving up your time to hear what I'm sure will be a really interesting discussion here today. My name is Chris Scarisbrick and I'm the Sales Director for Sectra here in the UK. And speaking with me on today's webinar will be Mattias Mjöman, radiologist from Region Skåne in Sweden, and Peter Poullos, radiologist from Stanford Health Care in the US. Now in this session, we will hear how two radiologists have truly taken their diagnostic reading to the next level. Mattias and Peter have optimized their productivity by tailoring their diagnostic workstations in two completely different ways. Mattias utilized various devices to minimize mouse miles and added an arsenal of shortcuts to configure display protocols in a fraction of the time that it normally takes. Peter is currently pursuing a project in which he aims to control PACS using his voice, and he can perform his reading without any physical interaction at all. The webinar will consist of a 30-minute session followed by a 15-minute Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, then please submit them in the questions box. There will be poll questions asked during the webinar, and you will be asked to complete a short survey once the webinar concludes. I will now hand the microphone over to Mattias.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to this talk about how you can develop your radiology cockpit. My name is Mattias Mjöman, and I'm a radiologist at Region Skåne, Sweden, mainly working at the radiology department in Helsingborg. My aim today is to inspire you. I do not encourage you to specifically copy what I have done, but rather to start a thought process about what could benefit you in your daily work. Today we have PACS systems that can do so very much, and with the possibilities comes the expectations to use it and take advantage of all of its functionality. Still, we rarely get more time on our hands and even more seldom more fingers on our hands. The trick for me is trying to use what I have as efficiently as possible. The gaming industry has over the years taken this concept to a whole new level, and there is a lot to be learned from it in terms of both efficiency and ergonomics. When you are in the midst of a fast-paced game, you do not have the time to look for a button to click on the screen if you want to get to the next level or beat the competition. You need the command to be right at your fingertips. Having played some computer games in younger days, I have come across a great deal of different hardware that is intended to enhance speed and accuracy. Naturally, I was interested in seeing if I could use this to improve my radiology game as well. One obstacle concerning this comes from the way we are organized at my department. We do not have our own personal workstations, but move around between different stations, sometimes up to 4 or 5 times per day, depending on our assignments. As we are several hospitals working together, a lot of us also move between different hospitals from day to day. It would be impractical and maybe not appreciated by the IT department for me to install hardware-specific drivers at every new workstation I come to. And I do not want my setup to give the colleague coming after me any issues. So the solution for me was to find hardware that did not require driver installations, but rather worked standalone. The first personal hardware I got myself was a mouse with many more buttons. There are several varieties of this type of mouse on the market. One of these stood apart in that it did not rely on proprietary drivers. Instead, it had an onboard memory that could store any specific setup of keys. It was the Logitech G600. It has some 20 extra buttons, including a third ring finger click button. I could do the setup on my home computer, and after that, at whatever computer I was using it, a push of a button on the mouse would by the computer be seen as a keystroke on the keyboard. These shortcuts help me to automate repetitive tasks and minimize moving the cursor over the screen looking for small buttons, and thereby saving mouse miles. Here you can see some of the functions I use for the small buttons by the thumb. I've tried to pick out some of the most common functions, such as showing and updating work lists, switch between PACS windows, sync image stacks, and start and stop dictating. But my favorite time-saving feature of the mouse is that the scroll wheel not only clicks but also tilts to both sides. I use this when switching back and forth between different layouts in a hanging of an exam, and it has saved me a great deal of time over the years. I soon realized that I was so fond of this mouse that I shortly after purchased 3 of them, just in case it broke and the model would be out of production. After 8 years, I'm still on my very first one, so the quality seems to be fine, and this set of 3 will probably last me until retirement, unless, of course, I find anything even better before that. Even though 20 extra shortcut buttons are a lot, I was still limited by just using one letter or combinations with the Shift or Control keys. I was eager to find something that could automate tasks that required more complex inputs. The solution I found was a keyboard that you can program to emulate up to 2 × 110 keystrokes per button, and it also has its built-in memory for this. It was the Genovation CP48. The keyboard has 48 physical buttons and can hold a total of 96 shortcut sequences, thanks to a toggle button that gives me 2 layers to program. The keys have clear plastic removable tops under which I can put labels that explains the functions of the button. This keyboard I use both for simple shortcuts that didn't make it onto the shortlist on the mouse, but also for a lot more complex instructions that, for example, require multiple inputs separated by pressing the Enter key. As you can see here, I have color-coded the buttons to find them faster on the keyboard. So, for example, all the yellow buttons are for creating hanging layouts, and the white ones are for changing window level presets. Some buttons I have just moved to this keyboard because I wanted the buttons in a different configuration than what is on a standard QWERTY keyboard. The second layer, reached via the toggle button, I mainly used for adding short standard phrases, such as latest examination performed in, and then I just add the date with speech recognition. I can also use buttons to both open a new browser window and go to specific website URLs, all in just one keystroke. When I first started using these devices, I kept connecting them one by one to the workstations I used. But quite soon I mounted all of them to a thin wooden board and connected all to one single USB hub. In this way, I now only have one USB cable to connect to the workstation. I have placed USB extensions on the desks of the workstations I most frequently use, so that I don't have to bend down and connect to the computer under the desk every time. On the board, I also attached some other items, like a 64 GB USB drive for documents and lectures and such. I have a holder for my data glasses, and I have my personal compact QWERTY keyboard, a thing that is quite nice to have in these days of the pandemic. At first, I had a shoulder bag for my board that I carried around, and my colleagues jokingly said that I would one day probably end up with a trolley, and here we are. Having this box on wheels gives me not only the convenience of getting my things up and down very fast, it also gives me extra storage space under the board for items such as documents, a very nice mouse pad, something not to be neglected, ask any gamer, and an ergonomic armrest. This box is also sturdy enough to sit on for colleagues who come by to discuss a case, should there not be any other chair around. And, of course, it has a coffee cup holder. When I change between hospitals, I do not take this box with me, but only use a smaller bag for the board, one that was originally intended for carrying a kick bike. Since I now use shortcuts to control the dictation, I no longer need to hold the dictaphone in my hand. The accuracy of the speech recognition is quite dependent on the position of the microphone, so this led to another DIY project. A neck holder for the dictaphone, made from a cut-off swan neck mobile phone holder, and some tube isolation foam for comfort. The plus side with this setup is that I can use the standard dictaphone that is already connected to the workstation. I just clip it in and I'm ready to go. And I still see the red record light in the corner of my eye. On the negative side is that I am with this somewhat tied by the cable to the desk. But in terms of setup and speed though, it is super easy, barely an inconvenience. Since I made this dictaphone holder, I have now also started using the new Philips Speech One headset, which I really like. It's wireless, quick to connect, quite lightweight, works great with IDS 7 out of the box, and has impressive microphone performance. Almost the only drawback I have experienced using it in our environment is that I have to disconnect the standard dictaphone each time I want to use my Speech One, since there is a conflict with IDS 7 if more than one dictaphone is connected at the same time. There is no need to restart the computer though, I just change the cables. We as radiologists are daily working with extreme high tech. I have the opinion that using this together with low-tech solutions is usually not a problem. Let me give you an example of just how low-tech I have gone. Before we changed to speech recognition that supported to be started and paused with shortcuts, I was frustrated that my left hand was almost exclusively used to control the pause button on the dictaphone. I only had my right hand to control the mouse and shortcut buttons unless I put the dictaphone down. After thinking about this for a while, I built myself a device out of old Meccano parts that I had saved. Now I could put the dictaphone in this holder and with the press of the thumb start, pause and end dictation. This worked best in combination with some sort of extra microphone, and finally I found I had to make too many adjustments for each workstation I came to that made it impractical. Maybe if I had had my own dedicated workstation, I would have used it for a longer period. Luckily now, our new speech recognition supports shortcut start and stop, so finally I can control this with the shortcut button on my mouse, and the left hand is now free to activate shortcuts on my extra keyboard. If you are lucky enough to have your own personal workstation that you always use and are allowed to make adjustments to it, like install drivers, you will have a lot more options than what I have described here. In any case, I urge you to always have a dialogue with your IT department in what you are doing. I often find that the IT engineers get excited to see small projects like this and want to help you get it working. If all of these hardware add-ons look cumbersome to you, I still have one piece of advice for everyone, and that is to use the built-in possibilities for personal customization of the system. I find it strange how many radiologists just keep on working with the setup that someone else has decided for them. Take a small amount of time to figure out what the most common things you do are and rank them in importance. Then go to the settings and group these buttons or menu items so that they are always closest on your pop-up menu or toolbar. Give common and repetitive tasks the simplest shortcuts. Avoid combination with Shift and Control keys for the most often used shortcuts. If you do not feel familiar with going into the settings menus and make the changes yourself, just do the first bit by figuring out how you'd like to work and picking out what tools are most important to you. Then get your super user or PACS administrator to help you with the actual configuration. Try it out, and if it doesn't turn out perfect, it's easy to change again. If you take some small amount of time to do this, it can end up saving you both time and reduce frustrations for years to come. In conclusion, here are 7 pieces of advice. Only do this if you enjoy it. Make it technically stable. If it keeps breaking, it will probably not save you any time. Do not fear combining high-tech and low-tech solutions. If it works fine, then don't worry too much how it looks. Do not integrate any device that requires drivers to be installed on the workstation unless you have your own personal workstation and you are permitted to add non-standard drivers and programs to it. Focus on creating shortcuts for the repetitive tasks you use most often and automate them first. Try to replace buttons on the screen with shortcuts. It will reduce your mouse miles significantly. And finally, the opportunities are endless. Do not just accept preset interface solutions that annoy you every day. A small amount of work to solve it will pay off many times over the years. Thank you and good luck in creating your own personal radiology cockpit.
So Mattias, thank you for sharing your experiences. Some really innovative and pragmatic solutions there for sure. Now, just a little reminder to the audience, if you have any questions for Mattias, please don't forget to enter them into the questions box. Next, we will hear about Peter's experiences and current project involving controlling packs using his voice.
Hi, my name is Dr. Peter Poullos. I'm a radiologist at Stanford University and the founder of the Stanford Medicine Abilities Coalition. I will be speaking about challenges in controlling your radiology workspace with a disability, focusing on ergonomics, devices, and speech recognition. I have no relevant financial disclosures, and I am not being compensated for my participation today. First, I'm going to share my personal journey as a radiologist. Next, I will discuss my use of assistive technology. Then I will go over the details of a joint project between Stanford, Nuance, and Sectra to control the packs by voice. Lastly, I will describe how COVID-19 has changed our workflows and the implications for assistive technology. This photo on the left is of me in 2002 in my bicycle racing kit, a fit and energetic 30-year-old climbing a very steep incline in San Francisco. This photo on the right was taken in the intensive care unit of San Francisco General Hospital. On January 5th, 2003, halfway through my first year of a GI fellowship, I had a bicycle accident and was instantly paralyzed from the neck down. After weeks in the hospital, this photo on the left is of me operating a motorized wheelchair using my chin, arms strapped down to my side. After many months of rehabilitation, I regained movement in my legs, enough to slowly walk short distances with crutches. This middle photo was taken a few weeks after my discharge. Now using a joystick-controlled wheelchair, I returned to work and saw patients in the clinic, now with a personal assistant, but it was admittedly a difficult adjustment. This photo on the right is of me in 2008, riding high on my Segway, which is a significant mobility boost. If I left you with this picture of me, however, it would be very misleading. You would have to sit next to me to understand, and I will explain a little more. This photo is of my hands with wrists and fingers in maximum voluntary extension, a comfortable distance apart. Although I was previously right-handed, my right arm and hand are now quite paralyzed. Luckily, my left hand and arm are a little bit better with enough dexterity to operate a mouse. So, unable to do GI procedures or examine patients, I faced the tough decision of switching specialties. Radiology drew me because of the visual aspects and the anatomy, but more importantly, the ability to work independently. A rehabilitation technologist from the California Department of Rehabilitation introduced me to assistive technology that made computer use the most straightforward aspect of my job. Confident that I could use my intact vision, speech, and cognition to practice radiology, I decided to switch fields. So in 2004, I started my radiology residency at Stanford. This photo was taken during my radiology residency. The switch was not without its challenges, but with open-mindedness and a few modifications, I was able to succeed. However, my upper extremity weakness does cost me efficiency and fatigue penalties. The mouse is the input device most accessible for me to use. All of the Stanford PACS workstations are equipped with the same Logitech M500 corded mouse pictured here on the lower left. It has programmable buttons and hyperfast scrolling. I've used multiple mice in the past, including wireless devices, but the ubiquitousness and adequacy of this mouse make carrying my own around unnecessary. As you see in this photo on the top left, I use a right-handed mouse in my left hand. That is pretty straightforward. You can see from the photo that my hands are not relaxed and I have to fight to keep them from contracting on the mouse. Some of the trainees use gaming mice with dozens of programmable buttons. I often end up having finger contractions that inadvertently click on them, launching undesired commands, some of which, such as changing the hanging protocol, are quite disruptive. So, when I read out at a trainee workstation, I start by disabling the programmable buttons. I also can't easily use the scroll wheel with my index finger. Instead, as shown in the photo on the right, I will use my index finger of the other hand to use the scroll wheel. There are, of course, innumerable mouse options available. I have experimented with, but don't regularly use any of the alternative devices, something that I will explain later. There are other input devices used by people with disabilities. Standard keyboards, such as the one seen here at my home hospital workstation, can feel too large. In this photo, my hands are spread apart to the maximum extent comfortably possible, which takes considerable effort. To this end, more compact keyboards are available. I've never used this keyboard pictured here on the left, but is similar to one that I used to use, with one difference. This one includes a built-in touchpad. Thus, one device would take the place of both mouse and keyboard. For people with the inability to easily use keyboard shortcuts requiring more than one simultaneous keystroke, there are programmable keypads. Each key can be programmed to execute any number of keystroke combinations or macros. The photo on the right is one that I have intermittently used, called the X keys, XK24. Let's turn our attention to the microphone. Most of the time I use the standard issue Nuance PowerMic 2 installed at all of our workstations, which is fine. Because I can't use a handheld microphone and the mouse at the same time, I need something on which to mount it. There are commercially available products to do this, like the one on the left. Many radiologists, myself included, mount the PowerMic in a flexible cell phone holder that clips onto the desk, like this inexpensive one on the right. If I am rotating around to different reading rooms, however, this is just one more thing to lug around, so I don't often use it. As you can tell, I don't like extra stuff. More commonly, I simply rest the microphone on one of the ubiquitous plastic containers of disinfectant wipes, which works well enough. Sometimes a free and low-tech solution is better. You may be thinking that I could use a headset, but those become uncomfortable after prolonged wearing. The most helpful computer solution for me has been voice recognition software. I started using Dragon Naturally Speaking in 2003. Dragon not only enables you to type by voice, but also to navigate the entire computer. It has extensive and customizable commands to automate specific tasks. These include opening programs, switching between applications, and creating macros. Comparing PowerScribe 360 with Dragon Naturally Speaking, speech recognition and document editing are features of both. But computer control outside of PowerScribe 360 is currently not possible. We started using Sectra PACS in 2018. In August 2019, we had the idea that maybe we could adapt PS360 to control the PACS. Therefore, we started a joint research project between Stanford, Sectra, and Nuance. It is not yet completed, but there is a beta version, and I'm very excited to try it. We think that voice control of the PACS would be beneficial to all radiologists, not just to someone with upper extremity weakness. A substantial proportion of the day, as you know, 35% in this one study, is spent on exam interpretation and reporting, and there is potential to speed this up. Although voice recognition and computer control has been available for many years, it has not been broadly deployed and adopted by the public until quite recently. The advent of Apple Siri voice controls with the iPhone S in 2011 and subsequent launch of Alexa and others have made talking to your devices commonplace. With improved technology, voice commands are finally more efficient than they are frustrating. So what are the opportunities for radiologists? Voice recognition has the potential to increase efficiency and reduce fatigue by reducing the number of clicks and mouse movements, especially when what one wants to do requires multiple clicks, wide movements, or the function is buried deep in a menu. Voice also gives you another option for user interaction and can be used in addition to standard keyboard shortcuts and the mouse, not necessarily replacing them. We are also evaluating the potential of AI to anticipate the needs of the radiologist. When first thinking about which voice functions to prioritize, my instinct was to program the most commonly used ones. For example, window level, distance measurement, arrow annotations. Because these commands are given while you are dictating, the software needs a cue to recognize that the radiologist is intending to control the PACS with the command and not to dictate a finding. To do this, we discovered that there must be a wake-up phrase. We have chosen "Hey Dragon" before each command. For example, "Hey Dragon, window level abdomen." "Hey Dragon, next series." The need for this adds a tiny bit of time and bother. Of note, this step is not necessary when using Dragon Naturally Speaking for the PC, as the software distinguishes between program-specific and global commands. Challenges on the way. The requirement for a wake-up phrase such as "Hey Dragon" was unanticipated at the start of the project. But because these are two different systems, we have not found a solution. One thing we have thought about is using a foot or a hand switch to signal that the user is generating a Sectra command rather than a PowerScribe one, or a dictation. The need for this additional phrase also prompted us to think about the type of tasks that we should program. Maybe a better use of voice commands would be to control more complex or mouse-intensive functions rather than simple or the most common ones. For example, changing a hanging protocol, switching work lists, adding a study to a conference, or pulling up a comparison on a specific monitor. Let's switch gears and talk about our teaching workflow at Stanford. Before the pandemic, the reading rooms were fully staffed with attendings, fellows, and residents. The attending went from workstation to workstation, using the trainees' login, mouse, and keyboard, reviewing the images side by side with the trainee. I would sign most of my reports at home on my hospital-owned workstation at the end of the day. In fact, that was the primary use of that workstation. But now with social distancing, the workflow has completely changed. Most people are not in the same room and may be reading from home. I have been doing readouts exclusively via Zoom or WebEx from home. So the computer that was mostly for signing reports at night is now in use all day long. Why do I mention this? Without even considering infection control, each of the paradigms has benefits and limitations for the physical and voice control of the workstation. The advantage of reading side by side is that the back and forth conversation is much quicker without the need to start and end screen sharing or wasting time talking over one another. A shortcoming is that the attending must use the hardware installed on the trainee's workstation or bring their own. If they bring their own, they must rotate their equipment from one workstation to the next, plugging and unplugging one or more devices. The alternative is to purchase multiple items, one for each workstation. I have rotated my X-Keys device or a wireless mouse in the past, and it has made things slightly more comfortable, but it is ultimately fatiguing. All of this to say that I end up using a very standard setup that is not optimized to maximize my function. In the new work paradigm, this has potential to change, And now that I know Mattias and I've been inspired by his setup, I will try and emulate his at home. And even when I go back to the hospital, now that I will not be rotating around to multiple computers every day. So my goal now is to combine voice recognition for Sectra control with an optimized hardware set up to create my own diagnostic cockpit. I will use pre-configured devices installed and optimized on my personal home workstation. I could test a similar configuration as described earlier by Mattias, proven in battle, even for hospital use. I think that the optimal setup would be a small keyboard, perhaps with a built-in trackpad, to eliminate the need for both a mouse and keyboard. I could control all of that with my left hand and keep my right hand free to operate a switch that tells the computer when I'm dictating into PowerScribe versus giving a command to the PACS. And instead of dictating into the standard microphone on the Clorox wipes box, I can use a desktop bottle plugged into a USB port as my default. I hope that was useful for you, and I thank you for your attention.
So truly interesting stories there from two radiologists. We hope that you are inspired by their experiences and ideas and have learned about the benefits and shortcomings of using various devices and software to optimize your diagnostic reading. Fascinating to see just how much your environment can be optimized with some thought and a little bit of effort. So thank you, Mattias and Peter, for sharing your stories. So we'll now begin the live Q&A. As a reminder, please submit your questions into the questions box and let's have a good discussion. Thank you ever so much, guys. Fascinating stuff. Really enjoyed that. Just Mattias, I really love your low-tech solutions there. I just maybe chuckle to myself. And for sure. And Peter, really goes to show that necessity is the mother of invention, I guess. Really good stuff. To the audience, you'll notice we have an additional participant on the panel here. This is Frederick Hall, Senior Vice President of Product here at Sectra. So responsible for a lot of things that happen within our product and our direction strategy moving forward. Frederick, may I invite you to make a few comments on the talk that we've just seen?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yep. Yes, we can.
Is it coming across as tinny or? Okay,
sounds
good.
Great.
Then it's only on my end. One of the reflections was that one of the product enhancements we're running right now is a large research project on enhancing the mammography keypad, and I think I see a lot of similarities in the needs here, that when you have a highly repetitive task and something that is really time critical, the ergonomics really makes a significant difference. So we've been doing a lot of research studies, visiting the end users on just trying to understand how their hand rests on top of keypads, the closeness of the commands, what type of commands are used in what context. And that, I think, we've learned a lot, and really understanding how important the ergonomics of the device is, both to the well-being and to the productivity of the users. I'm getting a comment here that my microphone is not working really well. I'll try and reconnect, but I'll open the floor for other questions and comments in the meantime.
Thank you, Frederick. It was a little bit tinny, but I think we could all hear the content okay.
All right, cool. I'll reconnect.
Okay, so at this time, guys, I'm just going to very quickly launch one more poll, if that's possible. So I shared the results there. Okay, I'll tell you what, guys. Let's head straight into the Q&A. So, Mattias, I think this one's for you actually, and it's from Michael Kokoska. And Michael asks, what devices requiring drivers do you recommend?
Well, as I said in my speech earlier, I try to avoid them. But if it's things that use commonly or readily available drivers, like standard mice and such, I would I would recommend anything that you find comfortable. We've tried different types of mice on our department. We tried the Ullman pen mouse and such things, and they pretty much are recognized by any computer as just standard mice, but with a different ergonomics. But I don't really have any specific hardware to recommend that use proprietary drivers that I have tried. I mainly try to look at devices that stand on their own, like the X keys that Peter uses. I think they are very interesting. There are variants of this with up to 60 keys, and they look really interesting, but they're a bit more expensive to get than the one I use.
Thank you, Mattias, and certainly one of the core facets, if you like, of the Sectra platform is to maintain vendor neutrality across all devices wherever possible. Yeah, thank you. We've got a number of comments coming here just thanking you guys in particular for your inspirational talk, which I wholeheartedly agree with. And let's see, we've got a question just come in from Peter Thome. And it is, will Sectra also be developing a computer control integration for Recognosco, which is currently being used with the Sectra packs? Frederick, I think that's one that sits within your sphere.
Absolutely, and it's something that we've tinkered with in terms of exploring the development. So it's absolutely something that's on the radar for us, being able to control similarly to Peter's experiment with the Nuance, but with the inbuilt PACS voice recognition solution from Recognosco. And I think in the end, we have all the opportunities since we control then both the voice recognition side and the application side. So it's something that we're exploring, but it's not on the short-term productization roadmap. Absolutely something that we're keeping aware of.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Frederick. We have another question from Michael here, which completely coincidentally I may be able to help with. The question is, do you have experience with mouse and keyboard that can control multiple PCs? Now, before I hand over to Mattias and Peter, just so happens that I use a mouse, I think it's called the Logitech M2, and I have a personal PC on my desk here, and I have my work laptop. And I am able to use something called Logitech Flow to move. As I move to the edge of one screen, it hops onto my personal PC and back again to the other. And one would assume that we could use a similar function with the PACS and another PC at the same time. What about you guys? Any experience in that respect? Mattias, Peter?
No,
but I want that. You make me jealous.
Yeah.
I'm constantly switching back and forth.
It also has some onboard memory, which enables me to right-click and copy from one PC and then paste into another PC. It's pretty cool.
I don't believe you, actually. Yeah. It's like magic.
That's great functionality, yeah.
Cool. Oh, we've got some more questions coming in here. Thick and fast, actually. So, hi guys, I work in a traditional setup with one RIS and two PACS screens. Could it be an idea to expand to more screens, either for internet applications or another PACS screen, maybe above the 3 standard screens? Any experience, and how easy is it to connect to another screen? And that's from Raw Pedersen. Frederick, maybe from a product perspective?
Well, from when I last visited Stanford, I saw a lot of users having tons of screens. I'm not sure if, I think 6 maybe, and some of them being widescreen, so essentially being 2 monitors in one. So I think that varies from site to site, but absolutely, I think one of the more common use cases at Stanford for the reading workstations is to have your work lists on the left and your diagnostic screens at front, and then have the right side screen for PowerScribe for the dictation software, right?
Yeah, most of our body imaging workstations are one large monitor for the images and then a vertical monitor for the work list, like you described it. On chest, we have 2 very large monitors, which, as you said, effectively is 4 screens instead of 2. It's quite nice for comparisons.
I think generally from a product perspective, it's supports a fair amount of screens. It's usually you run out of desk space before the application limits you. I think that's generally the scenario.
Yeah. Yes, and makes you have to turn your head a lot. So, but at my department, we have 2 physical screens. The image screen is divided into 2 virtual image screens, and there's the information window on a second screen. But at home, I use 3 screens. So I have 1 large screen in front of me for the images with a 2 image partition, and then I have the information window on one screen with the work lists, and for the third screen I use for matrix window and chat window. So you can set it.
Smart.
Thank you, Mattias. So we're heading in now to the last minute or 2 here. Michael, in answer to your question, does it require installing drivers on both PCs? The answer for this mouse is yes. If you want to use the functionality to go from one screen attached to one PC to the other screen, then the answer is yes. You need the Logitech Flow driver, I think, installing on both devices. And little thank you from Jag Darmet there from the UK.
I can add a final comment. I think one of the things that intrigued me from this presentation and one of the takeaways that I bring to the product teams is that I really would like to have more accessible data for the users and insights. So I would envision something within the workstation that with a click you could see these are my 20 most used commands based on the last month, and this is the mouse and keyboard shortcut currently tied to each, so that you can see my workflow being perfectly suited to my usage. And you may think that these are the most commonly used things, but when you get the data in front of you, quite often you find that, oh, I missed that one. So I think that would be really handy to understand this is my statistics and maybe how that correlates to the rest of the reading group, for instance. I think that would be something that helps you tailor your workflow.
It's interesting how few of the attendings actually know all the keyboard shortcuts.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I think it's worth pulling up the list and looking at it as a first step.
Yeah.
And one good tip is that you, in your department, you should get together and discuss these things, not just discuss cases, but discuss how you work and get smart solutions from your colleagues, because everybody finds some solution for some problem, and you should share these solutions.
Okay, guys. Thank you so much. We are at the end there. Jag, perhaps your question is regards bandwidth solutions for packs designed for home reporting versus on-site hospital reporting. I'd encourage you, Jag, maybe just to reach out to me directly. I'll be very happy to take that question offline. We do have some features built into the packs that very much enable reporting and access to imaging, etc., over low bandwidth, high latency connections, which I'd be very happy to discuss with you. So thank you for your attendance. Thank you for all of your questions. Big thank you to you guys that have helped us here and produce the material. Peter, middle of the night where you are, I guess off to bed for you.
I'm going to bed.
All right. Thanks a lot, Peter.
And thank you, Frederick. Bye-bye, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.